Welcome back to Wealth Mavericks, the podcast where we help doctors unlock the secrets to building generational wealth. And today, we're talking about credit cards and the role they play in your financial planning.
So it's about time we take steps in saying, yeah, you are wealthy, and here's what you need to do.
According to Einstein, the eighth wonder of the world, compounding interest, right? You've got the eighth wonder of the world working against you.
Today, we're going to talk about credit cards, but it's not the conversation that our listeners probably expect. Instead, it's about a mindset shift we can have toward credit cards, our credit limit, and how this plays into our larger financial plan. Bob, I'd love to hear from you about this mindset shift and why this has become part of our planning for our members.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting dialogue and conversation because you're right. It's when we start hearing about credit cards, especially from traditional financial planners, the Dave Ramseys and that group of professionals, that's a no-no. Credit cards are, I don't know. It's very negative dialogue. But when you think about, and this is kind of the process I went through with thinking about credit cards. When you think about the whole purpose and point of credit cards, why do people have credit cards? What's the point of it?
For credit.
For credit, right?
It's half the name.
I know. It's really weird. They really tried to hide it in plain sight by calling them credit cards. It's a line of credit. And with what most people have done, and this is why there's such a negative connotation to credit cards with financial advisors, Dave Ramsey, and so on and so forth, is because people have used that line of credit as their cash flow and to address their living expenses, or it was just, it's easier for people to use credit cards than it is to say, no, I'm not going to buy that. Right? I mean, it's the discipline of understanding your finances. And Joe, you've brought this up in previous episodes and just conversations that we've had with doctors about what you're spending. That's why we go through the cash flow recovery in the very initial conversation when we bring on members and go through that process is to see what you're spending, right? What are your habits, good or bad? It doesn't matter, but what you're spending. That's what drives your need for income. And so credit cards have become that process. But now, if we're looking at physicians, if we're looking at doctors, if we're looking at you and your marketplace, you don't typically use credit cards to supplement cash flow. You've got enough cash flow. You're looking for your extra cash flow to be able to go into other assets and investments. And that's why many physicians, you, are looking at this YouTube channel and watching our episodes or listening to the podcast because you want advice on how to reduce your expenses, which your main one is taxes, Uncle Sam, right? So when we look at credit cards, this was the idea that kind of popped up in my head, if you will, from a strategic planning perspective. Let's treat credit cards as a line of credit. I know, mind-blowing, Joe, you said it right. They're credit. Here's what I mean by that. Can't they be your emergency fund? Couldn't they be there for the necessity or the need of when an emergency or an event occurs to use that line of credit? The answer is yeah, right? Obviously. So then why in the world are we putting cash into checking accounts or savings account earning 1 or 2%? Why in the world are we deteriorating our wealth by creating quote unquote emergency funds 3 to 6 months? Think about your emergency fund 3 to 6 months. Let's say your family expenses are $20,000 a month. We're saying put anywhere from $60,000 to $120,000 in cash to deteriorate? That makes 0 sense. 0 sense. Let me clarify what I mean by deteriorate. Because, Bob, you said it, I'm making 2 to 3%. Yeah, but inflation, the Fed goal is 2%. It has been above that for the last 5 years or so. Will it continue to be that? That's the whole point of the Fed, is to manage inflation. That's the whole purpose. Now, they've gone beyond that purpose in certain areas. And what have we seen? High inflation. And so they come in and try to fix that. So if inflation's 3% and you're earning 3% in your savings account, that's a net zero. But any interest that you earn, the 3%, you're going to get a 1099, aren't you? And you're going to have to put that 1099 on your taxes, and you're going to have to pay taxes on that. So actually, what's happening to your cash? It's deteriorating. It's going down. Yeah. Where does that make sense? Nowhere. It makes sense nowhere. But that's the advice that is given to the general public. Well, guess what? You're not general public. You are part of the 1% income earners. You are the wealthy. Now, you may not feel like that, but you are, based on societal guidelines. So it's about time we take steps in saying, yeah, you are wealthy, and here's what you need to do. And it's interesting when you talk to groups that focus on the wealthy, this conversation is one of the first things they talk about. Do not put your cash in the bank and savings and checking account. You need to have it in other productive areas. So if that's the dialogue in the conversation, let's go back to why do we have credit cards then? What's the point of credit cards? For emergency. Think about it. Do emergencies pop up all the time? No, that's why they're emergencies.
We hope not, right?
Right? We hope not. And if so, stay away from us.
Well, and I think if you rewind the conversation to why credit cards and why is this advice coming out? Like, we know the penalties of carrying balance on a credit card is really negative. It's very, very high interest. It's prohibitively expensive. I'm just looking up some quick stats. You guys take a guess. So average credit card debt per generation, which generation do you think carries the highest balance on their credit card on average? Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, baby boomers, or the silent generation?
Boomers.
Aaron says boomers. Megan?
Gen X.
Gen X. Bob, what's your guess?
Whatever our generation is called.
Yeah. so the generation of 44 to 59, which is Gen X, carries on average just over $9,500 in credit card debt, compared to the average, which is like 6,800, something like that. So I think, and doctors, by the way, it's about 25% of doctors do carry credit card debt that they are paying down. And my guess is, like, look at, as you journey through life as a doctor, what do? You take out loans to get through school. Typically, most doctors graduate with a balance, and they might be supplementing their income for a while. So I do think it's interesting, Bob, it might be just, we talk about this all the time with doctors. You probably have outgrown your current financial team. Your current financial team was like serving the previous iteration of who you were. You're like a caterpillar that's turning into a butterfly. It's time to change vehicles. So I just think it's interesting. Like, there is a real reason why these pundits talk negatively about credit cards and why you do want to avoid them. But Bob, to your point, these emergencies aren't happening all the time. They shouldn't be happening all the time. So why sit idle in cash, while these things are not happening?
And Joe, Bob, Aaron, this is something that a lot of our members, they're self-built. So they didn't come from wealth. They built everything from the ground up. And this is all a learning curve for them. And that perspective shift, it comes down to education and having, a team on their side like ourselves that's really willing to open our knowledge bank to them and share with them there's a better way. There's a better way for you to do this. Now, I know one pushback that I've seen a lot, and Bob, you might be able to speak really well on this. Well, what about my mortgage? What about paying my mortgage? That's a part of my 3 to 6 month expenses. Why is that amount specifically such a focus for our members? Because, my credit card, they won't let me pay it with my credit card. So what is your thoughts around this? And really, is it even a necessary thought for our members to be having this 3 to 6 months mortgage, this won't take a credit card kind of situation?
Yeah. So this topic is really designed around access to capital. When you think about a business owner, their focus is access to capital. How do I have capital, dollars, and how do I put it into productivity? That is capitalism, by the way. That's the reason why capital and capitalism are meaning the same thing. Capitalism is about taking capital and making it productive. So when we use lines of credit for credit cards as emergency fund, it means that we have access to that capital if there's an emergency. If we don't have an emergency and we don't use it, then there's no cost to that capital, meaning we haven't used it. So we're not paying 20, 30%. Plus you get 30 days to pay that off before you start earning. But imagine this, and I'm going to answer that question, Megan, because I think this is important as I dialogue about this to lead to that. When you think about I use a credit card versus I use cash for an emergency, the moment you use cash for an emergency, you lose that money. You don't have control over that capital. You just used it for that thing. Versus if you use your credit card for that emergency, you still have control over your capital because it's sitting in your other assets. You just have to have access for it. So if you want to, or it makes sense to pay that emergency debt off that we just put on the credit card, then do it. But if it doesn't make sense and it makes more sense to spread it over 2 months, who has that control to make that decision? You. That's called cash flow, right? There's a process of understanding that versus we just gave away the dollars, right? But what if those dollars are being productive? The key is access to capital. So what assets give us access to that capital? So that's why when we talk about that mortgage, right, that you can't use credit cards for that, but you still have 30 days to pay your mortgage. So your emergency, think about an emergency for a physician. What would that be? Let me just bring that up as a question for all of us. If an emergency is in the world of a physician, what does that look like? What would that be?
I mean, it could be the same as, anyone. It could be a, tragic event that happens that you're out of work for a period of time, a family event. I mean, those are the ones that I can think of right off the top of my head.
Natural disaster, if they live in a place, let's say they have hurricanes, tornadoes, normal stuff that everybody else has to deal with.
That's it. That's it. It's not the average public. An emergency may be, I got to get tires and brakes on my car. That's going to cost $1,200.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point. I mean, if you look at the general population, when there's very little margin for most Americans, we live at the brink. So most people are not living below their means. And so, Bob, not even said in jest, that could be what it is. I need to replace the tires and the wheels on my car. Oh, and the transmission is going out. And so therefore, cash flow, I need to borrow some money to pay for that. And then that just kind of accumulates. That's why Americans carry, what was it, $18 trillion in debt not on average, but 18 trillion in debt.
By the way, needing tires and brakes on a car is not an emergency. That doesn't meet the definition of an emergency. Well, but if I don't have a car, I can't get to work. You can get to work.
Yeah.
We've got Uber now.
Uber's awesome.
Right? You could have always used a taxi, but no one used a taxi, right? I mean, there's ways to get to your work. It's not an emergency, but it's urgent because of our convenience. But think about us as in our physicians and working with physicians. So having access to capital, but you got 30 days to pay your mortgage. If there's a catastrophic event or an emergency to the point that you guys brought up, right? A family emergency, a natural disaster. Well, do you still have access to capital? Yeah. So the comment and the point is still made. You don't need to have that money sitting in a checking or savings account to pay for that. You just need access within 30 days to have those funds to pay for those events. And when there's a natural disaster, we kind of know it happened, right? It just doesn't, it's not like it's a surprise initially, but then the aftermath, we know it's there. So if it looks like you're going to need 2 or 3 months of expenses, you have access to that capital. You take 2 or 3 months out of that asset, and now you have it available in your checking account to be able to go and pay for your emergency.
Well, and we're sitting here like nerding out on the like down to the penny and the dollar about all this, because the truth is, like, is your cash sitting there getting, degraded over time? Is that catastrophic? No, it's not. Is there severe penalties if you do carry a balance on your credit card? And yep. And we're just saying, like, there is a right way to do this. There is an actual right answer to the question, and it's mathematical. It's not like, oh, this is just how we feel about it. It's just there are things that make sense. The mindset, and Aaron, you brought up the mindset early on. There are some people who are going to never get there. They're just like, credit cards bad, I'll never do it. No problem. Like, we're not telling you you should use credit cards for this. We're just saying there is a right answer, and mathematically this is usually what it points to. Even if you had credit card balances that you had to carry and pay those high interest, what you have earned by having that cash that would have been sitting there in another account will offset whatever that might have been in the case that there actually is an emergency. So Bob, I know we talk about this all the time. It all goes back to mindset. What's going on between your ears? And if you can get that right, and we help coach people to do that, right? To get their mindset right around it. But I love it that we're sitting here nerding out around, like, percentage here and percentage there. Which one's going to be better for people? The truth is, like, it's got to align with your lifestyle. Do you guys remember the movie Catch Me If You Can?
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio I can't remember the guy's name in real life. It's not coming to me off the top of my head, but he talked about credit cards versus debit cards. And he's like, I always taught my kids, you never use a debit card. You always use a credit card if you use it properly. Because one, like, do you guys know what happens if you use your debit card, let's say for an online transaction, and it gets misused or taken or whatever, you can get your money back. It's less likely than if it's a credit card, but you can get your money back. It's just going to take a long time. Credit cards, however, instantaneous, because that's the bank's money, not your money in cash. So there's actually a lot of good rationale for even using your credit cards beyond just emergencies too.
It now becomes insurance.
Correct. Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
And Bob, we're not telling people to have no money in cash. So how do people determine how much to keep in cash? Because this stems from some of our members keep an exorbitant amount of money in, and they tell us, well, it just makes me feel better. And there's no logical rationale behind that. But like you said, we can't force them to make a change. But if someone's listening and they're like, okay, well, if I'm not going to go by the 3 to 6 month rule, what is the rule? How much money should I keep in checking and savings?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the answer goes back to education of what other vehicles are available to have access to that cash. So if you feel comfortable and you just because to your point, Megan, a lot of these are self-made. Right? They grew up in poor or lower middle class environments where it was paycheck to paycheck. Credit cards were used to keep food on the table. Right? And I was raised by a single mom. It was tight. My first official real job, my salary was more than my mom's, and she was there for 15 years. Right? So it's a real situation where people are like, I've always said, I'm going to have at least 6 figures sitting in my bank account because that just brings me peace. Awesome. Do it. Last thing we want you to do is
lose sleep
right, and stress and create tension in the marriage or the relationships or at work or with your patients, because this is in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
But part of this process is education. It's helping you understand what else is available. You can still make that decision. At the end of the day, it's still your money. Our job is to tell you the tools that are available to you, let you know how to use these tools, because each of these tools, it's kind of, I like to use the analogy of a dripping faucet. One drip doesn't make a big deal. It's not going to flood your house, but not managed and could be a big issue, could cause a lot of damage. Positively, the same is true. One little drip, not a big deal, but ongoing, it's a big deal. So each of these little dripping things and each of these utilizing these little tools to get a little extra rate of return, get a little more productivity out of your dollars over a period of time generates wealth over a period of time. It's not oh yeah situation. It's
Right.
oh wow, look at
Look
that.
at that.
That really is grown. Didn't know that. Wow, okay. Right? It's a shock later on. So to your point, Aaron, and the question is, it's a very good question, but at the same time, it's based on the individual, right? Like Joe said, we're nerding out on a percentage or two, right? That's our job. We're supposed to, right? But at the end of the day, this is part of the relationship, and get people to a point to where, we have to push you. You can't just sit in that pond of mediocrity. If we know you're in a pond of mediocrity, there's really only room for one, and it ain't me. Right? So our job is to rescue you. Don't allow it to be quicksand. Don't allow you to sink. Our job is to put a hand out and bring you up at whatever pace you're no longer comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
a
our
lot
job.
of course it is. And a lot of this, Bob, Joe, is surrounding like the polarization of our members and really where their education started. So you start self-made, you're taught what your parents were taught. So we go through these conversations at an early age, we get comfortable with what we think is what's best. Now, as we grow in wealth, we have to have this next level of education because without it, we will sink in that quicksand. The idea around credit cards are bad versus using credit cards or credit can help you build wealth astronomically. So it really comes down to this shift in education. It takes an open mindedness in order to be willing to receive that. A lot of that is just simply put like watching the information that we're a part of that picture, putting that data out there, helping our members to just say, well, what if it was this way? What would that look like? And how would that make a difference in your world?
And I think on a future episode, we could follow this up. I'm thinking in how listeners are hearing this, like, okay, I have this 100,000 or more sitting just in a savings account. What should I do with it? What are the best vehicles to grow my wealth better with this liquid money that I have? So I think that can definitely be a follow up for this episode. I think a great first step that we walk people through is we see all the time they've never seen their whole financial life on one picture, and they don't know, they forget about old accounts or IRAs, and they don't know how many credit cards they have open or what is their credit limit. And so a great start is to open up a spreadsheet and list out every credit card you have. What is the limit? What is the interest rate? And you add that all up and people see they have 6 figures in credit available to them. And now you can begin considering that as part of your emergency fund, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think last point to make is credit cards give points and rewards.
Yes.
So are we saying don't use them so you don't get those? Not at all. If you have the cash flow and you're using those credit cards to get points and you're paying down, we're not saying don't use it and just use them for emergencies. We're just saying if you have access to the rest of the credit as emergencies whenever they happen. So, but just don't build up a 30, 60, $80,000 balance and paying 20, 30 plus percent on those dollars, because that just doesn't make sense. But if you're looking to get points and you're trying to, you utilize those rewards, yeah, use that. But to your point, Aaron, is the clarity of writing things down and seeing is really quite eye-popping. And if in another episode, and I did this in my other YouTube channel called Asset Coach and Tax Strategist. Kenny will put a link down there to very similar conversation topic, but we expanded on the credit card aspect of, we meaning me, expanded on the credit card aspect of how to use them, but also understanding certain aspects about credit cards. Right? We don't go into the weeds. There's plenty of great people who can go into the weeds, but just from a generalized perspective of a different point of view to look at it. So yeah, no, I love this topic. It's interesting when we have this conversation with our members. It's the And,
Yeah.
I love that. I love when we're able to go into a conversation and go,
Huh.
Right.
Never
Well,
thought.
and to be clear, not to like knock too hard on like the Dave Ramseys of the world, but using the tools that they talk about, like the debt snowball and things like that, if you are carrying a balance on your credit card, is phenomenal advice. You do not like. I think all of us are saying balance on a credit card, bad thing. It's catastrophic to your wealth building. You've got the eighth wonder, according to Einstein, the eighth wonder of the world, compounding interest, right? You've got the eighth wonder of the world working against you. That's a bad thing. You don't want that.
Yeah.
And so getting out of that kind of debt, but then just not going so far the other way that you cannot like mentally see yourself using it. And I don't know if we really touched clearly on this. The goal is not, oh, you have an emergency and now all of a sudden you're going to have a balance on your credit cards. No, what we're saying is there are other assets that are still fairly liquid that can convert into capital to pay those things off quickly enough to, by the time when that bill is due, so to speak, is going to be available to do that. So we're not saying that you should have an emergency and then go into credit card debt. That's not the game that we're trying to play. There are just smart ways of doing things, and there are less smart way of doing things. So do things smart.
And I think in general, debt used unplanned is bad.
Right.
Business, personal, doesn't matter. And I think that's really where like the Dave Ramsey's talking to the general public, that's what he's trying to let them know is that you really don't have a plan for this. You're using this as cash flow, bad, right? But debt with a plan strategically to grow your wealth is a viable strategy of how to build wealth. And so we can talk about that in other episodes or an entirely separate episode on just debt and what's good, what's bad. And so maybe we make a note of that and do that in a future episode. So
Of course.
Good stuff.
And Bob, when it comes down to it, a lot of our members, they use credit cards to go that point route. They're booking that trip to Bali on points. We don't want to knock that, right? We're not. But at the end of the day, if you have the credit limit to be able to do both, build up your repertoire of points and have that emergency fund, have that access to capital, at the end of the day, that's everything. So that's really just the ending point for our team, is just utilize what you have to the best ability of what you have, right?
Absolutely. That was a great conversation. Doc, as always, we are so glad you joined us. Please share with your friends if you enjoyed it, subscribe, and join us next time. And until then, go be a wealth maverick.